where I work within the Center for Computing and Social Responsibility. My main interests in understanding or exploring the social and ethical implications of current and emerging technologies. And at the moment, AI is very much on top of my list in terms of exploring. So I am particularly interested in the social and economic aspects of AI, particularly in the global south, but also look at how AI is being explored or looked at from a global north perspective. So currently, I'm conducting AI workshops in Africa, specifically in Zambia, where I have conducted these workshops with parliamentarians, with civil society organizations, with policymakers, and different kinds of stakeholders. And for me, I think particularly from an African perspective, this AI discourse is emerging, and there's a lot of interest in that, especially with policymakers now. They are looking at putting together AI national policies, and I have contributed to the AI national strategy of Zambia. And one of the things that has been revealed to me, especially from other perspectives, from other stakeholders, aside from policymakers, is the fact that there is different levels of understanding of AI and its impact and its implications, particularly for their, say, constituencies, if you like. So that means that there's a little awareness, for instance, in terms of what responsibility looks like, or indeed the ethical concerns around artificial intelligence. But I think from what is happening now globally, especially when we're looking at it from the Trump effect, I think for me there could be a derailment in terms of how policymakers might actually be looking at responsible AI, particularly.
And you just play, okay?
No,
sorry, was it someone asking a question or?
No, I think somebody just joined and
okay.
they hadn't muted.
Right. So my concern is that there's going to be, I suppose, a change, I think, in how policymakers look at responsibility, or in terms of how they can actually consider ethical concerns around artificial intelligence. Perhaps this might not be happening, but I think perhaps it might not happen, but I think this is something that is that needs to be looked at very, very carefully. And on top of that, I think there's going to be fragmentation in terms of partnerships, especially when it comes to funding projects around responsibility, responsible AI, or indeed the awareness or understanding of artificial intelligence. But I think this, to me, would be a real shame, because we need to have that collaborative partnership. But when I went there the last time, I was supposed to, into Zambia, that is, I was supposed to work in conjunction with USAID. They were interested in offering a space where we could discuss elements of artificial intelligence. But as a few days before the workshop was supposed to happen, there was a directive that everything had to stop from the point of view of USAID. So they were not allowed to have any works done. They were not allowed to have any people in the premises. Just everything had to stop there and then. So I needed to find another venue. So the impact of Trump and the policies that they're putting in place is actually being felt right across the globe. And this, to me, I think is a major concern that needs to be looked at carefully. So I'll stop there for now, and I don't know if it's Laurence or somebody else.
Thank you very much. Next one will be Laurence on my screen.
Right. How long do you want me to talk for, Bernd? Because
2 minutes, 3 minutes. I know that's very difficult for you. Keep it short.
it is, and this is a very big topic. And Kutoma's already kind of given us some great kind of starting points for discussion there. I think the first thing I would say, I know you want me to talk about kind of research, but I'm just going to ignore that for a minute, the way that I do. I mean, it's interesting. I can see what Kutoma's saying about Trump and about policy, but if you've been around long enough, you also know that what goes around comes around. And the question is this is this a thing that's going to continue, or is it a blip? And when Trump leaves office in a not too soon enough time, even though it's 4 years, you know, are people just going to go, yeah, that was Trump. We're going to go back to kind of being more sensible. So I think that's one thing. Is I'm not saying that's the answer to everything, but is this really kind of an effect, or is it kind of is it a blip, as I said? In terms of kind of research that I've done that I think is kind of relevant to this, so I'm not going to go all the way back to kind of Sherpa, but Bernd and I kind of worked on that project, which is looking at kind of ethics of AI. But I think we're talking about not just AI, and I know Kutoma, it is definitely a topic, and it's still a very current topic. And we can talk about how AI has been around for ages, and then ChatGPT came along, and all of a sudden it was rediscovered. But the project that we had after Sherpa was an EU-funded project called Tech Ethos. And I think one of the things is that AI is already kind of here, and people are already using it. And so trying to get people to change their views on it, even though, as I said, it's sort of kind of new again, though where we are in the hype cycle, I'm not sure. It's kind of quite embedded, a lot of the issues. Whereas one thing that we were trying to do in Tech Ethos was to say, well, actually, can we take lessons that we've learned about ethics and responsibility and bring that into more emerging technologies? Because AI is only going to be around for so long. And actually, there are other technologies that are kind of nipping at its heels. People talk about quantum, obviously, that's kind of one that's suddenly kind of popped up again. But the ones that we looked at in Tech Ethos were kind of climate engineering, which, you know, is still there and is still an issue. And is interesting in that it has kind of politics already embedded in it. Neurotechnology, which actually links to trust Musk very well, because you know, he's one of the big people that's kind of been spearheading that. Although again, and it's really interesting. I mean, this is a complete aside, but I was listening to a program yesterday on the radio about people. Well, it's kind of Wake Up to Money, but they were talking about how there's been people are kind of looking at whether or not they want to buy Teslas or keep Teslas because of Musk's political stance. So there are also backlashes which are happening against people because of their kind of political stances. So you could also argue that maybe some people will go, oh, Trump says no to this, so I'm going to say yes. You know, is that a possible backlash that we'll hear? And then the third technology there was also some of these more kind of extended, what we call digital extended reality. So some of the kind of natural language processing, things like the augmented and virtual reality, which, you know, we have, but again, have time to kind of expand and think about, you know, what are the ethical and kind of responsible issues within those. And there are so many. I mean, you know, that's why I was asking how long, you know, but you know, I think one of the things that we find very difficult is we, you know, this is about future technology. You talk about future digital responsible futures. We actually find the future quite difficult to conceptualize. Maybe if we say 5 or 10 years, we can do that, because almost all of us will probably be alive. But if you say to people, tell us what it's going to be like in 50 years or 100 years, most people go, I don't know, I'm not even going to be here. But one of the things that we were talking about in Tech Ethos is this idea of responsibility to future generations. And, you know, how much are we willing to take not just responsibility for now, but for the things that are going to happen in the future? And if you're thinking about climate engineering, that's a really kind of serious issue. If you combine that with questions of things like irreversibility, you know, how far do we travel down a particular road before we try and kind of go back from that? And that you can see in all technologies. You know, we've gone so far down, you know, with our lovely kind of smartphones. Yay, everyone's got their smartphone that controls my life. Well, sorry, I use it to control my life. But, you know, have you tried giving it up? Is it really now an irreversible part of our lives? For a lot of people, I suspect it is. And there are lots of other kind of issues. I mean, I've got a whole list of issues here that we can talk about, from kind of the narrative of lay ethics to, kind of speed of change, but also things to do with governance and perception of uncertainty, and even things like ethics washing, and how kind of we want to talk about, kind of governance and regulation as a way that some big companies are going, yeah, we'll buy into that, just so we don't have to buy into all the other stuff that we should be doing as well. So I think there are lots of kind of challenges and issues there. And when we talk about responsibility, a bit like when we talk about ethics, sorry, what Kutoma was saying about AI, I'm not sure that we really have got a clear definition of what it means. What do we mean by responsibility? Who's responsible? Is it just one person? Should there be a kind of whole group of people? One last thing, and then I'll stop. I was at a conference recently, and someone stood up, professor in a Northern European university, stood up and said, right, I think what we should be doing is we should be taking responsibility for our own health records. And what we're going to do is we're going to have like a blockchain approach. So, it's going to be this kind of universal truth, and and it's not going to have any kind of central regulation, but we're each going to be responsible for our own health record. And I was trying to talk to him afterwards and say, hang on a minute, how many people want that responsibility? You're just assuming, this is a kind of computer science prof, you're assuming that people want. And then the second thing is, how many people can actually cope with that? Cope with as in the responsibility, but cope with as in the technology, but cope with as in understanding what these things mean and what you can do with them. And only to go, oh no, but we can do it. The technology is there. We can make this happen. But you have to think about, and I think that's the other thing, is getting people. I think within our circles, we might go, yeah, responsibility is a good thing, and we all need to be aware of it. We need to be thinking about it. But I'm not sure that in the rest of the world, how much people really have thought about this, understand what it means, and also understand some of the consequences of the technologies that are being developed. I'll stop there for the moment.
Thank you very much, Laurence. That was not too bad by your standards, only 8 minutes. George.
Hello, everyone. So my work revolves around moving beyond, or trying to get scientists and technologies to move beyond this whole notion of public good. So the idea is there. It's similar to what Laurence has just said. All scientists, or most scientists and technologists, will tell you that, their work is devoted to public good. But how do we move beyond this abstract idea of public good and translating it into actionable outcomes, concrete actions that actually benefit societies and people are ready to take responsibility for? And so in my work, I try to engage with scientists and technologists and members of the public to develop or to anticipate or think about technologies and societal desirability, and how do we anticipate problematic impacts of society, of technology, and develop things that are actually societally desirable. The blockchain example that Laurence has given is a good example. Scientists will think that all of these things, people are really interested in all of these sort of technologies, and is that what it really is? It's difficult to say. And so in my work, I try to engage members of the public in discussion, to collaborate with scientists and technologists in their work. In one of the projects I'm involved in currently, it's environmental, which is at the intersection of mental health and technology development. So the scientists and technologies are trying to develop interventions for treating mental health issues that are at the intersection of environmental challenges, environmental stressors, and how they impact the brain. And you're using a lot of virtual reality, machine learning, large language models to develop interventions, as well as pharmacological interventions as well. But and I try to engage members of the public with the developers in such a way that we understand what people impacted by this sort of technologies or this sort of issues actually want. Regarding the question of challenges, what I think the challenges are today, I think one big challenge is always this idea of how to balance market-driven innovation, so especially when it is politically driven, with ethical safeguard. It's always been a challenge. How do we balance, what the market, the so-called market wants, the developers want, and with ethical safeguards? It's always been a challenge, because we know that the way the market works is everything happens at speed, everything happens at pace, and they're always interested in profit. But in terms of ethical safeguards, it's a slow pace, right? Issues around values. How do you understand the values that people want? It's difficult to understand them, so you move at a very slow pace to understand the values. You'd have to think about the potential harms. You'd have to think about how to prevent them as well. So ethical safeguards move at a very slow pace. But how do you balance this tension between the fast pace of market-driven innovation and especially when there's also this angle of politics involved with ethical safeguards? And so that's what I think one of the main challenge for me is, how to balance those sort of challenges. I'll stop here for now.
Thank you very much, George. And the last one on the panel, Alfie.
Thank you. So I think a lot of what I was thinking about, we've already talked about, which is great for me because I've been losing my voice. So a lot of my work it doesn't necessarily begin this way, but it seems to end up also going back to thinking about what does responsibility actually mean, which is something that all three of the other panelists have already spoken about. So, for example, in a project I've done fairly recently with looking at failure in robotics, it boiled down to trying to work out who was responsible for the failure and what the responsibility on the robot was. And another project we've been doing about uncrewed aerial systems in traffic management, so drones in the airspace. A lot of the problems we've come across have again boiled down to who is going to be responsible for what. And so I think one of the big challenges that I often end up thinking about and banging my head against is this same idea that George was just talking about of who, and Laurence was just talking about, in terms of who is actually responsible. What is responsibility? And as researchers, what is our responsibility to be responsible? So how much should we be putting our values into these discussions about responsibility? And then also applying that back again, so making sure it comes full circle, not just stopping in a philosophical think tank, but talking about how we can make sure that technology is mutually beneficial and has other values of responsibility, that it's transparent, it's fair, that it's flexible and adaptable, so that it can change as these concepts change with the society that's defining them. And I think a lot of the challenges that we're facing are, as has already been said, about this lack of definition, absolutely, a lack of consensus globally. A lot of our technologies we're now trying to look at on a much more global scale. And what's responsible here in the UK might not be responsible over in Germany or somewhere in Africa. And trying to be aware of that whilst also making something tangible. And as George was just saying, trying to find the right balance between responsibility and innovation, trying to make sure that we've got motivation for people. What is it that's going to make people actually pick up this responsible innovation that we're doing and innovate in a responsible way? How can we make sure that it's interesting to them, that it's useful for them, and not just a tick box exercise that doesn't go anywhere? And then the other big challenge that I've been thinking a lot about recently is trying to pick a battle. So it's so complicated, the world out there, and there are so many different avenues that need exploring. AI, quantum, different economic zones, and all of these things are hugely important and really interesting. And trying to pick just one or two of them to actually make a difference in without going full neurodivergent and trying to do everything all at once is a huge challenge. And I think that's going to be really complicated in reflecting in what's going to happen with research in the future. And I know Laurence was saying, I think you said what goes around comes around. And yeah, I absolutely agree with that. But at the same time, when it comes around, there's damage that's been done and our processes need to be changing. I mean, we're talking right now about Trump, but we're still feeling the effects of Brexit. And I think the UK research landscape is quite a lonely place to be right now. And I wonder if in 4 years, if we do get a change in government over in the States, if some damage will have been done that actually will have changed the research landscape fundamentally here, in terms of what we consider responsible and what we can actually do for it. So.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Alfie. So I hear a very broad array of challenges, from the very fundamental, like what's the future going to hold? We never do that, we don't know, to conceptual questions, what's the responsibility, but also practical things. So where do we meet if US aid closes us down and we have no more funding to do anything? So a broad range, but I do think what came through is that the landscape is changing. Second round, keep it even shorter this time around. What is your priority? What do you think? So how do you set the priorities, Alfie? What is it that you want to focus on? And maybe turn the order around, just for fairness reason. Start with Alfie.
Oh, so I think there's 2 key things that I want to think about in terms of what our priorities are. One is our responsibility to ourselves as researchers and as people who live in the world, how we can look after each other in our communities when they are being tested. Particularly communities, it's a scary time to be queer or disabled or Black, brown, Asian, Jewish, Muslim. It's a scary time to be not part of the core major demographic, I suppose. So making sure that we're being responsible with and to ourselves is a huge priority, I think. And then also thinking about keeping sight of the mission that we have, trying not to get bogged down in bureaucracy or semantics as much as possible, and trying to make sure that we are still doing meaningful research that is making the world a little bit safer and a little bit more responsible for the people that we're working to make it so for. Nice and short.
Thank you very much, Alfie. George, what's your priority?
So the whole idea of ethics or ethical safeguards are not new. These concepts have been there for ages now, and it's in as much as it's a bit surprising that they're coming under a lot more pressure. I think these things have always been there. These pressures have always been there. It's just a little more prominent now than in times a few years ago. And I think one reason why they might be under so much pressure is because of the fact that we probably haven't demonstrated the tangible benefits enough. I think it's very difficult to demonstrate that the whole idea of ethics and ethical safeguards or responsible innovation has value or has a very, very positive impact on society. It's very difficult to demonstrate that. Yes, we think it does some good, but how do you really show that it has tangible benefits? So ethics has been around, these concepts have been around for many years, but because it's been very, very, very difficult to show tangible benefits, they continue to be swept aside, and I think that's a key challenge that we'll have to deal with. That's one of the things that we'll have to deal with in the years coming, in the coming years, because once you can really demonstrate that these things have value, they have practical impact or a positive impact for society, it is easier to build this whole idea of responsible innovation into people's into people's lives, and it becomes a broader, more well accepted idea and concept. So yes, we have to think about how we show or demonstrate that ethics and RRI has a lot more value.
Thank you very much. George, no, not George. Well, thank you very much, George. But Laurence, what's your priority?
Okay, so I just wanted to say, still not doing what you asked. Yeah, so I've got a great example of what George was saying, that because I think the same thing. It's very hard to go, yeah, what does this do? Because it's about stopping bad things happening rather than making something else happen. So for those of us that are a bit older, I don't know if you remember the Y2K problem. So in the year 2000, everyone thought the computers was just going to blah, because it was all to do with kind of the dates. And after 1999, people thought computers wouldn't be able to cope with it. So people spent a lot of time and effort and money to update systems to make sure that nothing bad happened, because they, one of the things was that planes were going to fall out of the sky because the systems that controlled them wouldn't be able to cope. And then people turned around and went, oh, that nothing bad happened. So why did we spend all that money? And it's like, we spent all that money and time and effort to make sure nothing bad happened. But the trouble is, the effect was nothing bad happened, and people went, oh, okay. So I think that's the problem that George was talking about, is we're trying to make sure nothing bad happens, but you can only show you've been successful when nothing bad does happen. Okay, so I can't pick that one because George has already talked about it. One of the things though that I think is actually really interesting about this space at the moment, and I mean, especially things like AI is a really good example of this, is it's really interesting. There is a lot of stuff out there. If you actually look for the information about kind of ethics and AI and to some extent responsibility in AI, there's a huge amount out there. And yet we're still going, well, this is really important. Why is no one listening to us? And so I think one of the things is, how do we actually take the frameworks that are already in existence and actually make them useful, almost make them, I'm not saying you have to pick one, but, for example, if you're in Europe, the high level expert group, they've got the Altai system. There are some really good systems that are out there already. Why are we still going, oh, people aren't listening to us? And I think that's the other thing is the conceptual change that we need to still effect within kind of industry and wider society. I'm not sure that people have really kind of bought into this yet. I think they go, yeah, we know ethics is important, but then when you go, but now you actually need to do something about it, they go, yeah, at some point. And as you said, the tick box exercise is much easier to do than actually properly buying into it. So I think the first thing is we've got to actually convince people that this is an issue that they need to deal with properly. And then the second thing is, I think we need to do something about the plethora of frameworks and models and all the other kind of, as I said, all the other bits of information that are out there, and actually try and actually see what we can do with them to make them useful. And kind of building on what George and Alfie said, actually make people say, yeah, this is something that we can take up and use and is usable as well as useful.
Thank you very much. Kutoma.
I think for me, it's basically just carrying on with the element of awareness and collaboration, but within the space of diversity, equality, and inclusion, which I think is also under assault in this current climate. Because I think without this, I mean, can you imagine innovation without checks, balances, and transparency? Because if diversity, inclusion, and equality are under assault, then obviously checks, balances, and transparency will also be is something that we need to be concerned about. So I think that's what we ought to be looking at as well, because otherwise, without this, then we can't really talk about a responsibility in innovation. Yeah.
Thank you very much. You seem to be all very practically oriented. I went to the Tech UK Digital Ethics Summit, it was called, a few weeks ago. And the main theme behind it was, well, thank God we're done with ethics now. We know what it is. Now we need to implement it. which I found a very interesting approach.